"Young lady, are you sure you're in the right seat? I think you stole my seat." The question, laced with doubt and disdain, sliced through the quiet hum of the first-class cabin like a blade. Tiana Rivers, a 32-year-old single mother with skin the shade of rich mahogany and eyes lined with quiet resilience, didn't flinch. She looked up slowly from her seat 1A, holding the stranger's gaze for just a second longer than expected, as if to say, "Yes, I belong." The early morning sun filtered through the high-glass windows of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, casting a golden sheen across the tarmac. Inside Gate C-17, boarding for Flight 841 to San Francisco had begun just moments ago, and already the air was thick with expectation. First-class passengers were settling in with tailored ease, their voices low, their movements practiced, their perfume faint but unmistakable. But the woman seated at the front, small carry-on tucked beneath her polished flats and tablet case resting gently on her lap, wasn't part of the usual mold. And that, apparently, was the problem. Tiana had earned this seat, not through inherited privilege or industry clout, but through 10 years of late nights, early mornings, and dreams she refused to abandon. She wasn't flying to San Francisco for a vacation. She was headed there to finalize a funding agreement for LearnSpark, the educational startup she'd built from scratch while working double shifts and raising her daughter alone. The meeting, if successful, would mark the single largest contract in the company's short but promising history. It was the kind of breakthrough that could shift the future not only for her child, but for thousands of under-resourced kids across the country. The first-class ticket had cost her more than just money. It represented sacrifice. She remembered the moment she'd clicked purchase on the airline's website. Her hands had trembled, not out of fear, but from the gravity of it all. Seat 1A was more than a number. It was a milestone, a symbol, proof that she had arrived. But the world wasn't ready to see her that way. Tiana wore a neatly tailored navy pantsuit, not flashy but crisply ironed. Her coiled curls were pulled into a sleek bun. No diamond earrings, no designer tote, just quiet confidence and a calm poise honed by years of being underestimated. As the other passengers took their places, men in silk ties, women with sleek hair and unreadable expressions, Tiana sat motionless, reviewing her talking points for the meeting that could change everything. That was when the trouble began. A woman in her 50s, all ivory cashmere and sharp lipstick, stood a few feet away, staring down at Tiana with a puzzled frown. Her ticket in hand, she glanced at the seat number, then back at Tiana. "This can't be right," the woman murmured to no one in particular. Then louder, "I've flown this route for years. Seat 1A is always mine." Tiana responded with a gentle nod. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is my seat. I have the boarding pass if you'd like to see it." But the woman didn't take her up on the offer. Instead, she turned to a nearby flight attendant and pointed. She must have made a mistake. "Please sort it out." The flight attendant, a tall man with a carefully trained smile, glanced nervously between the two women. "Of course, ma'am," he said quickly, before turning to Tiana. "May I see your boarding pass, miss?" Without missing a beat, Tiana handed it over. "Seat 1A. First class, paid in full." The attendant looked at it, then back at the woman. "Everything checks out." The woman's lips tightened. "Well, maybe she can move. She looks comfortable enough." Tiana heard every word. Her pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. She'd faced worse. Because this wasn't just about a seat. This was about who gets to be seen, who gets to be acknowledged, and who society still believes must prove their right to exist in certain spaces. Tiana knew that better than anyone. She had faced it in investor meetings, on conference calls, even in school pickup lines. But never had it crystallized as clearly or publicly as in that narrow row of plush leather seats. And now, with the whole first-class cabin watching, some pretending not to, others openly whispering, the pressure built. She could feel it in the stillness of the air, in the sideways glances, in the way the flight attendant hesitated just a beat too long before returning her ticket. But Tiana Rivers didn't move. She crossed one leg over the other, placed her tablet back in her lap, and stared out the window toward the rising sun. This was her seat, and she wasn't giving it up for anyone. Just moments earlier, when Tiana had first stepped into the first-class cabin, the tension had already begun to take shape, quiet and invisible, but unmistakable. As she crossed the threshold, a subtle shift rippled through the space, the kind of shift that didn't need words to be felt. Polished heads turned slightly, newspapers lowered just a fraction, eyebrows arched in restrained surprise. In a cabin designed to reflect exclusivity, her presence broke the unspoken symmetry. Tiana had walked in confidently, her boarding pass tucked in her hand, her shoulders squared. Yet even before she reached her seat, the glances came, sharp, assessing, and quick to judge. She wasn't dressed in designer labels. She had no diamond rings to flash, no silk scarf to adjust, or personal assistant trailing behind. And she was young, black, and a woman traveling alone. The aisle was short, but it felt far longer under the weight of their eyes. A man with graying temples sitting in 2B glanced at her shoes, then back up to her face, his expression unreadable but tight with surprise. Across the aisle, a woman in a beige trench coat leaned closer to her husband and whispered behind a manicured hand, her eyes never leaving Tiana's figure. Even the flight attendant who greeted her at the door seemed momentarily thrown off, offering a stiff smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. To them, she was out of place. First class, especially on this route, was an enclave for the familiar. Senior executives, corporate lawyers, retired donors on their way to wine country. Their world was curated, discreet, and silent in its rules. Tiana's very presence challenged those boundaries, not with noise or entitlement, but with calm dignity that had no name in their rulebook. As she reached seat 1A and placed her bag gently beneath the seat in front of her, she could feel the curiosity thick in the air. Not the pleasant kind that wonders who you are, but the guarded kind that questions how you got here in the first place. No one said a word. No one needed to. The room had already spoken. Yet Tiana didn't shrink beneath the scrutiny. She knew these looks well. She had seen them in upscale boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, and now, inevitably, here too. But she had not climbed her way into this moment, only to be rattled by the silent rules of a world that had tried to keep her out. Let them stare, she thought. She had a seat at this table, and she intended to keep it. The quiet tension that had greeted Tiana's arrival had barely begun to settle when the first crack in the facade of civility appeared. She was still adjusting her tablet in the seat back pocket and preparing to review her presentation notes when the subtle click of designer heels echoed through the cabin. A hush fell over the first few rows, like the shift in a room when someone important enters. Not because they are respected, but because they expect to be. Margaret Whitmore walked with the practiced confidence of someone who had grown used to the world bending slightly around her. At 72, with pearl earrings, a tailored ivory blazer, and silver hair swept into an elegant twist, she was every inch the image of long-standing privilege. Flight attendants greeted her with nods that bordered on deference. A young man in a gray suit instinctively moved aside to let her pass. She carried herself not just with entitlement, but with the certainty of her own correctness. Her eyes scanned the cabin quickly and stopped the moment they reached seat 1A. The flicker of confusion was brief but unmistakable. A small frown crept to the corners of her mouth as if something in her view had misaligned. She continued forward, pausing just inches from where Tiana sat. The air seemed to tighten again. "Young lady?" Margaret said, her tone crisp and polished, but laced with something cold beneath. "I believe there's been a mistake. This is my seat." Tiana looked up calmly, her face unreadable, her voice composed. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is seat 1A. It's the one printed on my boarding pass." Margaret didn't even glance at the pass. She clasped her handbag tighter and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm aware of what it says, but I've been sitting in this exact seat, 1A, for more than 10 years on this route. The airline always makes sure of that, it's understood." Tiana held her gaze, still polite. "I reserved and paid for this seat over a month ago." Margaret's smile tightened, and for the first time her words edged into insult. "That's not how things work in first class, dear. You're obviously new here. This seat is always mine. Surely someone like you wouldn't mind moving a few rows back. You're young. You'll be comfortable anywhere." Tiana said nothing at first. Around them, silence deepened. A few passengers pretended to be absorbed in their devices. Others watched openly, curiosity painted on their faces. The flight attendant at the front of the cabin shifted uneasily but did not intervene. Margaret continued. her voice now louder, enough for several rows to hear. This kind of disruption is exactly why the airline standards have slipped. First class used to mean something. Now it's just, she stopped herself, then added with a pointed glance at Tiana's plain black dress and natural curls. Available to anyone with a credit card, I suppose. Tiana could feel the heat of several stares now, the tension clinging to her like humidity before a storm. But she didn't flinch. She had heard worse. Just never in a place that claimed to be defined by elegance. "I'm not moving," she said softly, her tone even, her words deliberate. "This seat was not given to me. I earned it." The quiet firmness of her reply caused a ripple. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A woman in 3A exchanged glances with her husband. But no one spoke. Margaret's jaw clenched. "This is unbelievable," she hissed, more to herself than anyone else. "The airline knows who I am. Platinum status. I spend more on flights in a month than some people earn in a year." The implication didn't have to be explained. It hung there, heavy, condescending, and uncomfortably familiar. Margaret straightened, her eyes sharp now. "I'll speak to the crew," she announced, turning with sharp finality and heading toward the galley, muttering something about standards and children in grown-up seats. As her heels clicked away, the tension she left behind did not go with her. Tiana looked straight ahead. She didn't allow herself to look shaken. Her grip on the leather armrest tightened, but her spine stayed tall. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her place. It likely wouldn't be the last. But she wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Under the hum of recycled cabin air and the quiet rustle of boarding passengers settling into place, a hush hung over first class like a cloud charged with tension. Tiana Rivers sat upright in seat 1A, her spine straight, her palms resting calmly on her lap, but her heart drumming with the same steady rhythm that had carried her through years of hard-fought battles. She had felt this kind of scrutiny before. The invisible weight of assumption, the silent question in every averted gaze. But this moment was different. This time, it wasn't silence that came for her. It was a voice. Margaret Whitmore stood tall in the aisle, her pale hands gripping the back of seat 1B, her pearl earrings trembling just slightly with the movement of the plane. Her voice was low and measured, but carried the icy confidence of someone long accustomed to being obeyed. "Excuse me, miss," she said. "You may not know this, but I've been sitting in 1A for over a decade. It's where I always sit. I'm sure you understand." Tiana looked up slowly. Her eyes met Margaret's, reading not confusion or humility, but entitlement, plain, unapologetic, and sharp-edged. Before she could answer, Margaret leaned closer. "You're young. There's plenty of other seats in first. You'll be comfortable anywhere. I'd be grateful if you'd let me have this one." For a breathless moment, the only sound in the cabin was the quiet thud of an overhead bin being shut 2 rows down. Tiana reached into her sleek black tote and pulled out her boarding pass. She held it up, steady and clear. "This is my seat. 1A. Purchased weeks ago, confirmed and assigned." There was no anger in her voice, no spike of defiance, only the calm resolve of someone who had grown used to these challenges and had learned never to waver. Margaret's lips tightened, her eyes flicking to the flight attendant standing nearby, who had clearly been listening from the galley door. The attendant, a tall man in his 40s named Bryce, stepped forward with a polished smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Tiana, "Mrs. Whitmore is a long-time platinum guest. She's flown this route for years. We know you have a confirmed seat, but perhaps, for the sake of everyone's comfort, you'd consider taking 3C instead? It's still in first class, just 2 rows down." Tiana's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile never faltered. "Let me ask you something," she said, her voice clear and unshaken. "If I were a middle-aged white man in a suit, would anyone be asking me to give up my seat?" The effect was instantaneous. Bryce stiffened, visibly caught off guard. The other passengers, who had been watching with a sort of passive curiosity, shifted uncomfortably. A man in 1D coughed and looked away. A woman across the aisle raised her brows but said nothing. Even Margaret, still hovering over the armrest, took half a step back. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Tiana continued, still calm but louder now, addressing not just Bryce or Margaret but the entire cabin. "But I paid for this seat, I worked hard for it, and I have just as much right to sit here as anyone else. Respecting elders doesn't mean erasing myself. The atmosphere inside the cabin grew thick. The quiet murmur of voices had stopped. The kind of silence that only breaks when something deeply uncomfortable has been said out loud, settled like a fog. Margaret opened her mouth again, but no words came. She looked around, searching for allies, finding only downturned eyes and hesitant expressions. Bryce cleared his throat, forced another smile, and said nothing. Tiana leaned back into her seat, crossing her legs and retrieving the tablet she had planned to review during takeoff. She didn't need validation from this crowd. She had already fought battles bigger than their assumptions. She wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. She was here because she earned this space. And now, for the first time since she'd boarded, no one dared to ask her to move. The cabin had fallen into an uneasy quiet after Tiana's bold question sliced through the air like a knife. Her voice, calm yet unshakably firm, still echoed in the minds of everyone seated in first class. If I were a middle-aged white man in a tailored suit, would any of you have asked me to move? A thick, exposed silence followed, laden with discomfort and shame. Tiana didn't waver. With practiced ease, she reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. Ignoring the stares boring into her skin like needles, she calmly scrolled through her contacts and tapped the name she had always known she could rely on. Imani Blake. Her cousin. Her mentor. A senior board member at the airline. As the call connected, Tiana's voice remained level. Imani, I need to report an incident on Flight 762 to San Francisco, she said, her eyes sweeping the cabin, lingering briefly on the flight attendants huddled in the galley, and on Margaret Whitmore, who had now fallen into a resentful silence. There has been a clear act of racial and age-based discrimination. I was publicly asked to vacate my assigned seat, first-class seat 1A, for an older platinum member, simply because I didn't fit their idea of who belongs here. She paused, listening, then added, I'm not just asking for an apology, I'm asking for a public response that matches the gravity of what happened. Her voice dropped a register. Not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been made to feel like she doesn't belong. Imani's reply wasn't audible to the rest of the cabin, but Tiana's expression shifted ever so slightly, her spine straighter, her eyes steadier. She ended the call with a quiet, thank you, then placed her phone face down on the tray table and folded her hands. She didn't speak another word. She didn't need to. The wheels of justice had already begun turning. Less than 15 minutes later, tension mounted again as the front cabin doors slid open. Two sharply dressed airline officials stepped inside. One tall, composed, with a piercing gaze and a badge that read Brian Lattimore, Regional Director. The other smaller in stature but no less commanding, her ID tag reading Sophia Reyes, Director of Service Ethics. A hush swept over first class as they walked straight to seat 1A. Tiana Rivers? Brian asked, his tone professional but underlined with deep respect. She nodded. Yes. We received your report. Ms. Blake called personally. On behalf of Horizon Air, we'd like to offer our sincerest apologies for what you've endured. What you described does not reflect the values of our airline, and it ends today. Turning to the cabin, Brian addressed everyone, his voice clear and authoritative. It has come to our attention that a paying passenger was pressured to relinquish her assigned seat under circumstances that amount to discriminatory bias. Effective immediately, the lead flight attendant and involved crew members are suspended from duty pending a full ethics investigation. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The head attendant, who had moments earlier pressured Tiana with a disingenuous smile, now stood frozen in shock, her mouth slightly agape. Without another word, Sophia Reyes stepped forward and discreetly asked the woman to gather her things and exit the aircraft. Her steps, once confident, were now hesitant and heavy with disbelief. But Brian wasn't finished. He turned next to Margaret Whitmore, who sat fuming in 1C, her jaw tight, arms crossed like a schoolchild awaiting reprimand. Miss Whitmore, he said, tone now icy, your platinum status has been formally revoked. Due to your disruptive and discriminatory conduct, you will be deboarded immediately and barred from future preferential treatment on any Horizon-operated flights. Margaret shot to her feet. What? You can't do this to me. I've flown with Horizon for 23 years. I know the CEO personally. But her words fell flat against the silence of passengers now too stunned or too ashamed to come to her defense. Security personnel, summoned via silent protocol, stepped forward. One gently took her carry-on. "Ma'am, please come with us." Margaret's eyes darted wildly. "This is a mistake. You're humiliating me in front of everyone, all because of her?" She pointed an accusatory finger toward Tiana, her voice now trembling with rage. "No, Miss Whitmore," Sophia replied evenly. "We are holding you accountable for your own actions. Entitlement does not excuse prejudice, and seniority is not a shield for mistreatment." As Margaret was led out, her protests growing softer with each step, the entire cabin felt as if it had exhaled. A long-held breath finally released. Brian turned one last time to Tiana. "Miss Rivers, Horizon thanks you for your composure and courage. We are taking this as a turning point, not just for today, but for how we train and hold our crews accountable going forward. You did not just protect your own dignity. You've helped shine a light on a problem far too long ignored." Tiana met his gaze with quiet grace. "I just wanted to sit where I belonged. That shouldn't take courage." And with those simple words, the power dynamic within that aircraft and far beyond shifted. As the aircraft resumed its usual boarding rhythm, a new kind of silence lingered in first class. One not of discomfort, but of reflection. Tiana Rivers remained seated in 1A, her posture composed, her eyes calm, yet behind that stillness was a quiet storm of validation. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't demanded respect through rank or wealth, she had simply claimed her right to be treated with dignity, and the world had listened. Unbeknownst to Tiana at that moment, several passengers had recorded the entire encounter, their phones capturing not only the moment of confrontation, but the precise instant the old system cracked. By the time her flight landed in San Francisco, the footage had gone viral. Millions watched as a soft-spoken black single mother in a navy blazer calmly faced off against power and privilege and prevailed. The hashtag #RespectHerSeat trended worldwide within hours. From young women of color to corporate workers long denied promotions, from students tired of being overlooked to older adults confronting their own past biases, the response was overwhelming. Social media erupted with posts of solidarity, confessions of silent discrimination, and pledges to call out injustice wherever it appeared. News networks reached out for interviews. Editorials appeared in major publications praising not only Tiana's courage, but the systemic reckoning it had sparked. She became more than just a passenger on a plane. She became a symbol of quiet resistance, of self-respect, of what happens when one person dares to say, "Enough." In response to public pressure and sincere recognition of their shortcomings, the airline reached out again, this time with a different kind of request. They invited Tiana to serve as their official advisor on equity and inclusion, helping reshape staff training, rewrite policies, and ensure that no customer, regardless of appearance, income, or background, would be made to feel less than ever again. Tiana accepted, not for status, but because she knew the true cost of silence. She carried with her the hopes of every voice ignored, every rightful seat taken away, and through her new role, she helped thousands reclaim their spaces, with pride, without apology. If Tiana's story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that respect isn't given by status, it's earned by standing firm. Join the conversation with Respect Her Seat, and let's build a world where every seat, every space, and every soul is honored.